Likkutei Torah. Likkutei Torah, Parshas Balak, page 146, second column, 12, 13 lines from the top of the second column. Okay, now the Rabbi explained the first level of tshuva is sur meira, not becoming separated. The next thing is to do vasei teiv, which is bringing down elokus in the level of elokim. Because elokus normally, in order to come into a finite level, needs to be limited. Yet when a person does good, they break themselves over elokim, so then they bring down this infinite level of elokus the way it remains infinite. So he says, something which is a higher level, the blemish is worse. Like we know the Gemara says, Hashem is meticulous with tzaddikim like the width of a hair. Because if you have, let's say, a dirty garment, you get a little bit lint on it, you don't notice it. But a very clean garment, even the slightest piece of lint is very noticeable. Pirush Shemish and Ishma Segavaya, a person who has a higher neshama, as I pray Gemachet, Ba'abat Miasei Tev Sheina Eved Elkim. Therefore, the blemish of Elokut, like we find in this week's parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu, instead of talking to the rock, which he really did, and it didn't work, instead of speaking to the rock, he hit the rock. Because of that, he had this terrible punishment. He couldn't go into Eretz Yisrael. Question: what did he? And Hashem says, "He didn't sanctify me." What do you mean he didn't sanctify? He hit a rock. Who gets water from hitting a rock? I mean, obviously he sanctified Hashem's name. So it says it would be even more sanctification if he did it through speech. If he spoke to the rock, it would be even a greater level. And if you learned the Medrashim, it was the wrong rock, and he did whatever. Yeah, for Moshe Rabbeinu, that was a terrible sin. For us, that wouldn't be a sin at all. It'd be a big deal, so we did it.
The first time,
As I pray, then he doesn't mean he's not an Eved Elikim. And therefore, when he does something wrong, the descent is worse than a regular citizen's sin. Okay, so he says like this. A person in the level of tshuva, he says so far 2 tshuvas. There's sur meira, making sure you get rid of the blockage that doesn't allow godliness to come into the world. Then you have to have a seitei, because the purpose is to bring godliness into the world. The greater the person, the greater the blemish. Kiksiv, like it says, a person is likened to the tree of the field, and it says, the neshaydish of a person is eitz hu sada sheberachei Hashem. It says like this, Ki Adam Eitz HaSada. Translating it literally means a person is the tree of the field. So that's the literal definition. A person is the tree of the field. So what it means is a person is likened to a tree. But the Zohar says no. Adam Eitz HaSada. Where is the source of a neshama? From Eitz HaSada Sheberachei Hashem. Meaning like this, when Yitzchak, with the story with Yaakov and Yosef, he said when Yaakov walked into the room, Yitzchak said, you'd smell like the smell of the field that Hashem blessed. And Rashi says, Gan Eden walked in with Yaakov Avinu to Yitzchak, so Yitzchak smelled the smell of Gan Eden. So the Zohar says, what does it mean, Adam Eitz HaSada? A person's source, Adam, is Eitz HaSada, the field of Gan Eden. Shebachin, Shesh Nishmas Adam, it's Eitz, which is Sada B'Rashi Hashem. V'nei, al derech mashal. What's the analogy between a person and a tree? Eitz Eis Pri. A tree makes fruits. There are certain fruits it gives closer to the earth. Okay, so he says like this. A tree has lower fruits and higher fruits. In the higher fruits, even though they're higher, But when the wind blows and it knocks off the fruits from the tree, then the top fruits fall further away from the other fruits. And thank you. That the lower fruits don't fall. We learned this, the higher the thing, the lower it falls. Usually it says a wall. The higher part of the wall falls further away from the original place of the wall. Here the Alter Rebbe also says with the fruits of the tree. The higher fruits, when they're blown off the tree, fall further away from the tree. He says, like Chazal used the expression, from a high tower to a low pit. The Gemara says about certain great people that became Rishoyim. It says based on his greatness, that's how far down he fell. The same thing, just like it is by a tree, the same thing applies to neshamas, because a person is likened to a tree, the neshama. Eden comes from the level of thought. The whole world comes from speech. Yidden, the neshamas of a Jew, comes from olu b'machshava, from thought. The higher the level, is the descent greater. The same thing is with shviras hakelim ma'elam tehu, the sparks of tehu, which are higher than the world of tikkun, like we learned many times. When those sparks, the highest levels of kedusha, the sparks fell down, they fall down lower than the less holy levels of kedusha that fall. The higher the thing, there falls lower. Therefore, tzemeach, plant, can give life to an animal. This we learned in the other Maimah of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe asks, how can higher things sustain themselves from lower things? An animal sustains itself from grass. But plant is lower than animal. And humans sustain themselves from plant and inanimate than animals. So how can higher things sustain themselves from lower things? So we learned many times, that Arizal explains, because we're living, the fact that animals down here fell lower, and plant fell lower, and inanimate fell even lower, that shows it originates in a higher level than people. So when you eat something and you reveal the source of the plant or the animal or the inanimate, then it's able to in the source they're very high. Therefore when they fell down very low. Therefore the begam of a person who's a Talmid Chacham, if he blemishes in not doing positive mitzvahs, is worse than the sin of an Amoritz. Okay, then the sin is worse, obviously, because the greater person, when they fall, the fall is further away. So the blemish of a higher person is even lower. This explains a lot of things, by the way. So, something which is treif, or total shoshkis hatameis, originates in a very lofty level, because it fell very low. That means it originates in a very high place. So the question is, if it's a very high place, so why can't we elevate it? So the answer is, because this super high thing that fell down in a very low place, we don't have the ability to elevate it. Yet, till Mashiach comes. But in essence, something which is treif, something which is total evil, based on the rule, the higher the thing, the lower it falls. So really it originates in a high place. That's why we discussed Monday night at the class, how do you name a Parsha Balak? Kairach at least was a Jew, Balak is mamish an anti-Semite. So how do you name a parsha in Chumash Balak? So the answer is, in essence, Balak is much greater. That's why Mashiach comes from Balak. David HaMelech comes from Balak. Because Balak was Melech Moav. Rus, right, the convert from Moav, the ancestor of David HaMelech and Mashiach, was a descendant of Balak. She was Balak's grandchild. So Rus, the Chayr of Mashiach, comes from Balak. How can Mashiach come from Balak? The answer is because in essence, Balak is a very lofty level. Therefore, we learned in the past also that where does Mashiach come from, besides that aspect? Where does Mashiach come from? He comes from Light and his two daughters, incest, that gave birth to Ammon and Moav. Right, the story in the Chumash, with Light and the two daughters. After Zidane was destroyed, yeah. So Light had a relation, incest with his two daughters, created Ammon and Moav, which again, the ancestor of Mashiach. Where does, that's Rus. Rus married Boaz. Where does Boaz come from? Yehuda and Tamar's story. Father-in-law, daughter-in-law story. Which is again, even though before Matan Torah was allowed. But still, it came from something forbidden. There's a famous guy in Judaism, he's called Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, if he would have been born 80 years later, would be a mamzer. Moshe Rabbeinu was born from Amram and Yocheved, which was an aunt marrying a nephew. An uncle is allowed to marry a niece, but an aunt is not allowed to marry a nephew. And if you do, the kid's a mamzer. So even though before Matan Torah was allowed, so legally he wasn't a mamzer, but the bottom line is Moshe Rabbeinu came from a relationship that was really after Matan Torah forbidden. At Matan Torah, Amnon and Yocheved divorced. They had to divorce. They were not allowed to stay married together. How is it possible Moshe Rabbeinu comes from such a relationship, Mashiach comes from? The answer is, normal circumstances, we can't elevate those things. Therefore, they're forbidden, completely forbidden. But there's certain unique situations, because forbidden things originate in a higher place, so normally, under normal circumstances, until Mashiach comes, we can't elevate it. If we can't elevate it, it's mamish forbidden. But certain circumstances, the Eibishter, made like this and like this and like this, that certain things should happen because in essence, they're higher levels.
At least start the conversation with food. Food
No.
being lower than the person that eats.
Yeah, but you're not allowed to enjoy food. Remember, no food, no cars, no house.
That was yesterday.
No. So today also.
But that's drastically different than saying than these like terrible sins like theft.
It's the same, yes.
We use the same in the
Yeah,
same
but it's the
breath,
same concept of something higher falls lower. That's the mashal.
But it's very different to say this.
I'm not saying it's not different, but the bottom line is, how does food sustain a person if the person is higher than the food? The answer is because the food, the fact that it's lower, shows it originates in a higher place. If you want a bigger extreme of that, things which are completely forbidden originate in a place of Kedusha that's too great.
How did Lot and Balak elevate such a moment?
The Eibishter did, Hashem did it. It had to happen. It happened through them. That's why Balak is a parsha in Chumash. Not only is Balak a parsha in Chumash, the place in Chumash that really talks the most about Mashiach, there's illusions here, Oz Yoshim, but the Psukim of Bilam's prophecy, what he said at the end, Bilam said, I'm going to tell you what will happen to you b'achas hayamim when Mashiach comes. That's all from Bilam, in the parsha called Balak. So not only is Balak a parsha in Chumash, there's a Russian guy that hated the Jews, yeah? Not only that, but the issue is the greatest brachas come in that parsha.
Most important, Shusterman in Yitro and Balak.
Huh?
Yitro and Balak.
Matan Torah is in Yisrael. Okay, but Yisro converted. That was, if you think about it, yeah. The greatest psukim in Chumash Avaseres Adibris is in Yisro. Dorach Keichem Yaakov, the whole thing, Matei Valacha Yaakov, all those great brachas of Mashiach and all that is in Parshas Balak. Said by Bilam. Both Jew haters. Because now that doesn't mean, okay, I'm going to go eat treif because I'm going to elevate it. I'm going to do something forbidden because I'm going to elevate it. That you can't do, obviously. But under certain circumstances, Hashem makes things happen the way they happened for that to happen. Which explains, according to Rashi, another thing. How did Lot get drunk? So Rashi says, he found wine in the caves. It was a miracle. Why did God do a miracle to put wine in a cave that Lot should be able to have incest with his daughters? He did a miracle. Hashem did a miracle, put wine in the cave somehow. Yeah? See, the Ramban learns it wasn't a miracle. The Ramban learns that in those days people put, like in wine cellars, so people used to put their wine in caves. So the Ramban learns that it was, not a miracle. Rashi says, Yain is damlam b'mayit. It was a miracle. Why would Hashem do a miracle, for instance? Because Hashem needed Mashiach to be born. So Hashem, like this, why Mashiach to be born? Why? Because coming back to this point, the higher the thing, the lower it falls. Here, the Rebbe is saying, when a person who's greater sins, it's a worse sin than a person who's not so bad. Not so good.
So the transgender is coming from our source.